Hello, everybody. Good afternoon from here in Nigeria, ladies and gentlemen. I want to specially welcome us to the special section of the Azure Administrator Live Study section of this weekend, being 29th of May 2021. I welcome us to this section on this day. I am very sure this is going to be a very great section, and yeah, at the end, it's going to be a great section. So right before us, we have our social handle that I will appeal to every one of us to find time and see a way we can get into any of our social handle and um, uh, um, view our productions over there. We have the meetup social handle, which has to do with Azure Nigeria meetup. We also have our Twitch handle, which has to do with Azure Nigeria Twitch. There also we have the YouTube handle, which is Azure Nigeria YouTube handle. We also have our Twitter handle, that is the Azure Nigeria Twitter. There also we have the link handle, which is Azure Nigeria LinkedIn, and our Telegram handle. So please feel free to take your time and explore those handle section. All right. So today we have today is, it promised to be very special. It promised to be very great. It promised to be very to be very great with aspect of continuous studies with regards to the Azure cloud platform. The cloud platform, it's actually an environment whereby you come into and you try as much as possible to learn as much as you can learn from the environment. Today's own section is going to be a section which is on the virtual networking. The virtual networking is going to be a great section that where you can always try as much as possible to deploy your resources within a virtual network in the environment in the cloud. Okay, later on as well in the evening, we'll be having the Azure DevOps section, and also in the coming weekend, we'll be having the Azure site-to-site connectivity section, and as well in later of next week we'll be having the DevOps section. So we'll also still request every one of us to find the time and join those sections as the training progresses. Thank you. So today's section will actually be anchored by a special speaker. And I'm very sure that we are all prepared to receive today's own training. Today's own section is going to be handled by a brother, by a friend, a mentor, and as well a lecturer, a professor when it comes to the aspect of the Azure virtual networking environment. It's not any other person but Mr. Kofi, the Kofi from the Gold City, the Gold Man. I call him the Gold Man. So he's a brother that has so much gold to give to us today. As a matter of fact, this is a brother that I've known for a long time. He's somebody that is very passionate when it comes to aspect of technology and innovation, with a constant drive to learn, and to learn, thus keeping up to date with latest trends. So he's somebody that is very loaded. Just try as much as possible to sit tight, relax your mind, and get as much as you can get from this man. As a matter of fact, he's somebody that has 8 years of experience in working in the cybersecurity industry with great knowledge in the networking, firewalls, virtual networking, VPN deployment, and just come to talk about it, anything networking, this man is going to give it to us. So please sit tight while we have on board Mr. Kofi. Please take over, please. Thank you.
Wow. I don't know what to say. I'm lost of words. Thank you for the wonderful introduction. About the goat farm, that's an interesting one. I believe Sir David is spreading the news. Don't tell anybody. Well, thank you, thank you, Stephen, for such a wonderful introduction, and thank you all, especially Sir David, for organizing this, because we had a bit of an issue this morning, and everything is resolved, all thanks to the tremendous work you guys have been doing in the background. I believe you guys are excited as I am. It's a wonderful day outside here, and I believe wherever you are enjoying your day and taking the time to join the session. I can't thank you enough. So I hopefully I'll deliver something great, and you learn one or two. So wherever you learn, that'll be great. So as Stephen said, today is about network security. So we're just going to start this here. So one moment, let me bring up my slide. Okay, so Azure Network Azure Network, let's go in. Right, so when we talk about Azure Network, one of the things people might think is, okay, is the Azure Network different from what we have on-prem, or is this something totally, similar, right? But most of the time, it's all about what you want in the cloud, right? It can be similar and it can be different. So let's go into a bit further, right? So for Azure, there's a lot of services. There is storage account, load balancers, there is application gateway. There's tons of services that you can actually deploy in the cloud. But then you have to think about, how do these all work together? How do they communicate? That's when network comes in. So on-prem, the same thing. You require network for your resources to talk to each other. That's the same logic here. They need to have a medium of communication, right? So then we deploy networking. The network will allow intercommunication between resources, and also if they wanted to communicate or talk to services outside the network, for example, something on the internet, something on your on-prem environment, all require networking. So that's what we're going to talk about today.
Hello, sorry, Mr. Kofi. Sorry for coming in. Please, we can't actually see your slides. Can the slide be made available?
Yeah, sure.
Just let us. Yeah, thank you.
All right, can you see my screen now? All right, can you see it now? Oh, hello?
Not yet. We can't still see it, please. Okay, so it's available now.
It's available now. Oh, okay.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, but you can hear me loud and clear as well, right?
Yes, very loud and clear.
Oh, that's great. Okay, so let's carry on. So when we talk about the virtual networking, on Azure, once you search for, let's say, virtual networking, the first thing that will come up will be the blade. Let me just quickly. Okay, yeah, I think that should be fine. All right, it will be the virtual networking blade. And once you click it, obviously for anything on Azure, it will ask you to select your subscription and then the name and what have you. So the next tab will be the main thing, which will be the virtual networking, where you will essentially start the configuration of your virtual network. And then in there, you will define a subnet. So then you have the option to define various subnets. So you can break your virtual network into various units, depending on the logical approach you might take. And then in the subnet, you tie that one to network interfaces. So this will be linked to your VMs. It can be linked to network security gateway or even public IP addresses. All right. So yeah. All right. So let's look at the overview of the whole Azure virtual network. All right. So on-prem, one of the reasons why you require network is isolation or segmentation. You want that small unit whereby you can logically group your resources. So you can have your servers subnet, you can have your client network and stuff like that. The same logic applies on in the cloud as well, an Azure network, so whereby you can segregate them, right? And the segregation also take it to another level, whereby you can use region as well. So when you deploy resources to a specific region, it will a virtual network to a specific region, it essentially is isolated from another network in another region. That's another aspect as well. But one thing you have to take into consideration is this: each time you deploy a virtual network, all the subnet within that network can talk to each other. That's the default. That's how it's made, right? Unless you actually put some filters in place. You can use network security as an example, or you can also use firewall, like a network appliance, for example, to segregate these networks. So when you also deploy the virtual network, by default, it can actually communicate outside. There is internet connectivity. A typical example would be when you deploy a VM into a specific network. You realize that instantly, the moment you go into or you boot up the VM, once you go in there, you can just go to the internet. That's one of the
Hello,
things.
Mr.
So
Kofi.
yeah, hello.
Sorry for coming again. Please, there's a request from Okoyemi Stephen to perhaps make the slide full screen.
Okay, sure. No worries. Let me just do it this way.
All right.
All right. Can you still see the slides?
Yes, you can see it.
Okay. All right, that's great. All right. So by default, you can communicate to the internet. So that means you'll be able to browse the net, wherever resource you want to go to, or even on-prem environment. So when we talk about the on-prem, I mean, obviously, for you to get to it, you need to use other technologies like VPN to set up a connection between your VNet on Azure to your on-prem resources, or you can even use expert routes as well. And so those are the things you can actually use to communicate to your on-prem environment. We will talk about this next week in terms of the connectivity, network connectivity to your on-prem environment. Right. So the other thing we will also look at will be the filtering, right, and routing. With virtual network, you are allowed to use the network security group, as I mentioned earlier, and also the network virtual appliance. And these will allow you to create this kind of filtering. For example, you can use the network security to allow specific services, for example, RDP or SSH, and then block everything else. And these are quite extremely good, because if you are dealing with things on your on-prem environment, you want security. The same thing applies to when you move to the cloud. You need to take security as a very, very important thing. And using the network virtual appliance, you can deploy third-party firewalls. So I'll actually demo that one as well, whereby I use a third-party firewall to filter network traffic. All right. So the other thing that we have is you can also connect the virtual network together using VNet peering or VNet gateway to allow that sort of communication between VNets. All right, so this is the VNet blade. When you go on to the Azure portal, right, once you deploy the VNet, you have the option, as you can see here, you have a block of a IP address. Once you define that, then within the same block, you can split them into certain slices. So you can have, let's say, subnet 0, whereby probably I can put all my service in there, and then subnet 1, I can put a different resource in there. If I want them to talk to each other, then I can create, they can talk to each other by default. But if I want to prevent certain traffic from passing across, then I can use a network security to actually block that. All right. So then the other aspect would be the subnet. So like I was talking about this earlier, with a subnet, you can create a specific unit from the VNet block from that address scheme, and then create a smaller unit containing a specific IP address range. But one thing you have to bear in mind is this: when you create these address, there will be 5 IP addresses that are reserved. I mean, you don't have control over that. So that's extremely important when you are creating these networks. I think what I'll do is, right, I will show you a quick demo so you can see what I mean. So let me just go into virtual network. Okay, so I'm just going to create a virtual network so you can see the process of the creation. So the first thing, as always, you click on add, and then you define your subscription, followed by your resource group. So the resource group, I'm just going to create a new one. I'm just going to create a new one as RNet resource group. And then you have to give this resource a name. So I just make
Hi,
this.
hi, Mr. Kofi.
Hello.
Yeah, yeah. Sorry for coming again. Please, can we see your portal, please?
Oh, you
So
can
we
see
can
it. All right.
see,
Let me.
yeah, so we can see the demonstration.
Okay, 1 second. Let me just bring this up.
Thank you.
Okay, can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes, we can see the
that's great.
portal now. Better. Thank you.
Okay, so like I was saying earlier, I've already set up the subscription, and then the resource group. I've defined a resource group of RNet-RG for the resource, and for the name, I'll just give it a name as RNet, and for region, I'll use East US. All right, so let's click on next. So this is the main part of this this session for today, virtual networking. This is where I define the network. So the first block of IP is where I define the network for this specific VNet. So I'm just going to make this one 10.80. So 10.80.0.0/16. And then I'll add a subnet. So you can also add an IPv6 address space if you want, but I'm just going to stick with IPv4. So I'll click on add a subnet, and then I'll define a subnet as subnet 0. And I'll make this one 10.80.0.0/24. But another important thing, when you're creating the address here, it has to be within this block here, because you cannot create a subnet which is outside the block of the virtual network range of IPs or range of network. So you create it that way. And as you can see from right below this, it tells you that 5 of them are reserved. So for example, if I decide to lower this down to, let's say, /30, right? It tells me that I don't have enough IP address to even use, because it won't work that way. The minimum I can go is actually /29. So if I then change this one to /29, then it will allow me. But we're going to make this one /24. And one thing we can see from here is that we also have the service endpoint. So this is another very, very good feature that is added onto this subnet. It's allow your subnet to be able to communicate with other resources on the Azure platform, essentially. So if I drop this one down, you can see there are many resources that you can actually link it to. So for example, if I type in storage, it will give me the storage option here. I can select that one. That means this subnet can talk to my my storage, essentially, if I have one. All right, but I'm not going to do that. So then I'll click on add. So I added a subnet. So I just one subnet, but if you want, you can add multiple subnet if you want to. All right, so let me just click on this. All right, I'll leave this one as it is, and then I'll click on review and create. Okay, validation passed successfully, so can create our resource. Okay, so the resource is created. All right, so now let's go into the resource here. So this is the RNet virtual network I just created. And you can see the subnet is actually defined here. I can add an additional subnet here if I want to. So I can click on here, and I'm just going to add a new one, a subnet 0, so subnet 1. And as you can see, it already populated an address for me, because you can see that the scope of address I have for my main network, and also can see what I've already used. And then it will generate something that is unused, so that you don't create any conflict, because it's very essential that your address are different. You have to be unique. And it's quite important. Even just think about it. If you're on-prem environment, you still need to ensure that all your network are unique, because the moment you start to have different network that are similar, there will be a conflict. And even if you are setting up a VPN connection to, let's say, another company, you need to ensure that those subnet or network you're connecting to are totally different from your network. The same logic applies here on the Azure as well. All right. So once you create the subnet, you also get the option to add a network security group, or even a routing table as well. And you can also add the service endpoint as well. So let's click on save. It shouldn't take that long. Okay, here you go. So the moment you create it, it will tell you the available IP addresses. The moment you start now utilizing these addresses, it will reduce the number that will show us available, right? And also the way you can see which devices or which client have these IP addresses by clicking on the connected devices. So essentially, once we deploy, let's say, VMs into the subnet, what will happen is that it will utilize the NIC. You see the NIC names showing up here, and you can have multiple NICs linked to one specific VPN per se. So what we will do as well is that I'll create a VM so that we'll link it to these resources. So let's do that. So to do this, you can just simply type VM and select the virtual machines and click on the add virtual machine. And just going to deploy this one into the same resource group I created earlier. And I'll name this one as VM1. The region is US. Availability option, I'll leave that as default. I'll deploy a Windows Server 2019. For the size, that's good for me, but you can select a different size if you want. I mean, depending on your taste. All right, so let's click on next. And now let's see what we have here. So let's give it a username. So I'll name this one test admin and password. So it matched. All right. Then you get option of allowing certain ports. So I'm just going to allow RDP. So I'll leave that one as it is. And for the licenses, I'll leave this one on check, and then I'll click on disk. For the disk, I'll leave it as the default, and then I'll move to the next one. Okay, so here, I'm just going to deploy this one into our subnet 0. And then I will like a public IP address, so I'll leave this one as it is. I'll leave it at VM1 IP. And for the security group, I'll use the basic. So that means a network security group will be attached to it. We will discuss the network security in much details later on. All right, so I'll leave the rest as it is, and then I'll click on management. I think everything seems to be okay, so I'll just use review and create. While this one is creating, what I'll do is, I will deploy the VM2 as well using the same template, just that I'll make a few changes to it. So I'm just going to click on create. It shouldn't really take long to create this resource. So while this one is creating, I'll click on the template and then click on deploy. And in here, I'm just going to define VM2. So I'll put in the same resource group. And for the network interface, I'll just change the last number slightly so we get a different network interface. And for the security group, I'll use the same security group, so I'll leave as it is. I'll deploy this one also into the subnet 0. And for the public IP address, I'll need a new one. So I'll change this one to 2. And for the address, I'll leave it as dynamic. So the first VM has been done already, as you can see right there. I'll change the machine name. So this will be VM2 for the machine name here. And for the password, okay, that's done successfully. All right, so that's about it. So I think that's good to go. Make sure there's no spacing. All right, let's click on review and create. Okay, validation done successfully. So now let's create this resource as well. Okay, while this one is creating, let's quickly jump to the virtual machine plate. Okay, so that's the VM1 here. It's deployed and running already, so we can click on that. Okay, so once you click on that, we can go to the networking blade, and we can see that there is a public IP address associated with this, and it's deployed into the RNet subnet 0. And actually, one of the very, very useful things you can actually do is to observe this one from the topology. So at least this will give you a graphical representation of what you've deployed. So the second VM is created already on time. So let's click on deployment and see our whole network in a full picture. Okay, so essentially this is our network. So we can see that the first one at the top is our virtual network, and inside that VNet, we have 2 subnets, subnet 0 and subnet 1. And we've deployed machines into subnet 0. So as you can see from here, subnet 0, we got 2 attachments. We have VM 1252 and VM 1253. So these are the NIC cards. And this one is linked to VM1, and this one is linked to VM2. And as you can see, both are linked to the same network security group there, and both have a unique public IP addresses. So this is really good. I mean, it can get complex. I mean, when it gets complex, you can then come into, let's say, the topology and check your whole network, and you can download it as well. So for example, if you want to show this to your management or another team what you deploy, this is the way to go, essentially. Okay, so let's go back. Okay, so we've deployed this. Let's go back to the slides. So I'm just going to...
Hello, Mr. Kofi.
Yeah.
Hello, Mr. Kofi.
Yeah, I can hear you.
So we just have, we have questions now coming in.
Sure.
Okay, so I have a couple of questions, about 2 questions from our people. So I have the first one from Okwayemi, and the question goes: can the virtual network be linked to the on-premises VM?
Yeah.
That is the first question.
So
okay.
The way to go about this will be the VNet peering, or you can use any other VM or a point to site, whereby you can use another VPN to you set it up on just that specific client you want to communicate to the VMs, and then you can set it up that way. So to do that, you have to use a site-to-site VPN or point-to-site VPN to allow your on-prem to talk to the virtual network. And if it's from another VM or another network on Azure itself, then you have to use VNet peering.
That's perfect. That's perfect. So that is absolutely correct. And by next week, we'll be seeing the point to site and also the site to site configuration.
That's right.
We'll see how we can get connected between on-prem and also the Azure virtual network. So the second question goes: how we can explore public and private subnet in VNet?
Can you repeat that again?
How can we explore public and private subnet in VNet? and such concept here. Any
Okay.
such concept here?
All right. So when I'll talk about the public later, but we do have a public service as well. So as you can see from here, public IP addresses. So if you want to, let's say, create a block of public IP addresses, then you can use these services here to create those. In terms of the private IP addresses, it obviously I'll talk about that one also later, but it will also conform to the same RFC 1918 private IP address ranges. And in regards to that, in terms of defining those ranges, you use the subnet. So then you use the subnet we've been going through in terms of VNet. Let me just go back here. You utilize the subnet blade to create those range, and then if you deploy a device or a VM that is in this specific subnet, then they will get an IP address, and by that they can get an IP. It can be dynamically allocated. For example, the VMs we deployed. Let me just go back to those VMs. The VM we deployed by default. I mean, the moment you deploy it, the address will be given to them dynamically. So if I go to the network blade here and then click on the virtual interface here and then IP config. All right. These are dynamically deployed, but I can change it to static. So as you can see here, we got it as dynamic. So you can change it. So these are the things you can actually do when it comes to making changes in terms of your private IP address. But I'll go into this a bit more later in the slides. Okay.
Yeah, perfect, awesome. So the next question there, it's if my resources can easily communicate in Azure, why do I need virtual network?
Why do you need virtual network?
Yeah.
It's all about, at the moment, there's a lot of companies moving to the cloud for a reason. It's even especially with the COVID issue. When you deploy your resources to the cloud, they have a huge bandwidth, and also you can deploy your resources to a specific region close to, let's say, your customers, so they can have access to. For example, once you deploy to those resources to a region close to your customers, one of the benefits would be that you can deploy, let's say, a web service in there, and then when client connect to those resources, it's going to be more like the round trip will be quicker compared to, let's say, going to your on-prem. And sometimes the security also plays a part. Sometimes you don't want to put your people to connect directly to your on-prem resources. You want your workers to probably have cloud services they can actually connect to, and having the resources on the cloud is beneficial. So and it's all about also think about scalability. One of the good thing about the cloud is the ability to scale, and then ability to reduce the size depending on the load at a specific time or period, right? So when you deploy your own, let's say, data farm, right, that's a lot of money. But when you actually utilize the cloud, right, the benefit of that one is you can actually deploy resources you need at that moment in time. If you need that capacity anymore, you can downscale it. So there's a huge benefit when it comes to deploying your resources to the cloud, including virtual network. Okay. Is there any more questions?
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Mr.
Yeah.
Kofi. Thank you very much for that, for doing justice to that.
No
Okay.
worries.
I think there's one last one here that says I have 3 app service and one database on Azure without virtual network. Okay, I suppose that actually continued the question I actually sent earlier on. That is, if my resources can easily communicate in Azure, why do I need virtual network? So the continuation of it is I have 3 app services and one database on Azure without virtual network. Does it make sense?
No. Oh,
Okay.
don't worry. I think we'll come back to
The
that one later because I think we time is against us at the moment. So let's quickly.
all right.
Yeah. All right. So I'm just going to bring up the slides. 1 second. Okay. Can you see my screen? Hello. Right, Steven.
Yes, you can. Yes, you can see your screen. We can see your screen.
Okay. All right. That's great.
Yeah.
All right. So now I'm just going to talk about the external communication. So like I mentioned earlier, when you set up your let's say a VM or virtual network, instantly they should be able to communicate to the internet. So the reason is this, right? The NSG you actually link to those resources, it will have a default rules in place, and one of these default rules is to allow connection to the internet, and the other one is to allow virtual network to talk to each other. So then it will allow the subnet within those resources to communicate, unless you then define a user-defined rule that will do otherwise. All right, let's go to the next one. Okay, so I mean, I just talked a bit about the public and the private IP addresses. So when let's look into a bit more. So when we talk about the public IP address, just the Azure environment, just like the on-prem, it allows you to also deploy public IP address and also the private IP addresses. But there are certain things that are quite unique in terms of, let's say, the public or the private. So let's look into this a bit more. So I'm just going to quickly bring up my portal again. Okay, can you see my screen? Okay, so now let's talk about the public IP addresses. When we talk about public IP addresses, there are two things we need to consider. There's a basic one, and also there is a standard one, right? So there are two SKUs. So let's go in here. So when you're creating these public IP address, you can select IPv4, IPv6, or even both. But one important aspect would be the SKU, because the moment you set a SKU, you cannot change that. All right. So you have to be careful, but you have to think about the difference between the standard and also the basic. One of the very, very obvious difference would be that once you select the standard, it gives you the option to have availability zone, right? So the moment you switch to, let's say, basic, you lose that functionality. So when you're deploying, you need to take that into consideration. Another thing will be the regional and also the global, right? You can define the IP, the public IP address to be regional based, or you can make it global. So the moment you select global, one of the benefits is that it will then use a load balancer, a global load balancer, and then you then have to confirm your primary location, and then it will deploy a load balancer to allow the resource to be globally available in the other region as well. All right. So for the basic, right, when you select the basic, you realize that you now have the option to select a dynamic or static. But look at the difference. When you select the standard, you don't have that option. This can be good and can be bad in certain ways. So it all depends on, and also I think cost as well. When you deploy something and you reserve those IP addresses, I think the cost will be much higher. So you have the option to dynamic. But the moment you select dynamic, you need to understand that each time you probably boot down your computer or the VM and then you power it on, it will get a different IP address. So for certain services, you want to retain a fixed IP address. That's when you use the static. But then when you switch to standard, you have no option. You have no choice, essentially. You can only use the static IP address in that regards. All right. So those are one of the things you have to take into consideration. Right. But now let's go to the private IP addresses. So in terms of private IP addresses, the Azure still conform to the 1918 IP addresses. So if I go to the FAQ of the network security and check for, let me see if I can find it here. Yeah, there it is. Right. So it's still conform to the RFC 1918 IP addresses. So that means the private IP address scope of, let's say, if you want a huge scope, then you can use the class A private address scope, and then obviously you can use the class B as well, and also that. So that's one of the things you definitely have to take into consideration. And then the other aspect would be, actually, let's search for, the other aspect would be DHCP, right? When you set up when you move your resource from your on-prem to the cloud, on-prem, you have DHCP, you have control over the IP addresses that you can actually assign to client. You lose that ability here. When you deploy things on cloud, the Azure environment take care of that. There is the option for that dynamic, and that will be taken care of by Azure. So when you deploy that, let me just bring up DHCP. Right. So when you deploy that, you realize that you will no longer be able to have a DHCP. So you will not have, so you see, one of the things you have with DHCP on the on-prem environment is that there is a time limit. You can set up expiring date, expiring time and stuff like that for the lease. You don't have the option here. So what will happen is that once you deploy it, it will keep that address until you probably reboot the device, and then you lose it. All right. It doesn't have any time that, okay, a certain period of time, you're just going to lose those IP addresses. So that's one thing you have to also take into consideration, right? And I'm just also going to show you, I think in here, they have the restrictions. So the 5 IP addresses that that is reserved, right? You realize that just like any IP address, network IP addresses, you realize that more likely the first address, which is like .0, is always reserved for the network address. And Azure also reserve .1 for the default gateway. I think I can show you that once we jump onto one of the VMs. And you can see that they also reserve .2 and also .3 for the Azure DNS IP address for the VNet space. And the last IP address, which is normally for broadcast, the same is here as well. They have the .255 set for the network broadcast address. All right, so I'm just going to quickly show you these the addresses, and let me just bring up my test environment. All right, let me just quickly jump back to the portal, and let's go to VM. Okay, just going to connect to VM1. Can you see the VM? Steven. Steven, can you see the VM?
Okay. Hi, Mr. Kofi. Yes, we can actually see the portal. You can see your portal currently.
Oh, okay. All right, let me
We
just.
can see the virtual machine. Yeah,
You can see the virtual machine.
correct. Yeah.
I'm in the VM at the moment. Can you see that?
Not really. Not really.
Not really. Okay, don't worry. I'm
Just
just
the
going
portal.
to. Okay, I'm just going to do that now. Okay, can you see my screen? Steven, can you see my screen?
No, we can't actually see your screen that is shared. We can't see that. We can't see it currently. Okay, great. We can see the VM now. We
Okay,
can see
so
the
okay.
virtual machine you log into. Yeah.
All right. So now let me quickly jump onto this one here. So I'm just going to bring up a PowerShell. And in the PowerShell, if I type in ipconfig, you can see the default gateway is showing up as 10.80.0.1. Because by default, like we saw on that FAQ, this will be the default gateway, the one that one of the IP address that is reserved. If I then go into /o, all right, you notice that for the DHCP server, you have the special IP address that is dealing with the DHCP assignment, and the same thing applies to the DNS. So the DNS currently, I'm using the Azure provided DNS. So then it will also use the special IP address in terms of the DNS. And you can see that the moment I deploy something on the cloud, it will get a DNS address instantly. I don't need to do much. You can obviously set up your own DNS as well, but these are the things that you get it for free. But the downside is that you don't have control over, let's say, changing of the suffix. You don't have control over that, right? And also, one of the things that are very common is that when you're on-prem, normally you might change your IP address from here. When you go to here, in the cloud, this is no. When you go to Roam, you do what the Roam do. Even though you still have the option to do it here, if you do it by coming into, she'll load up momentarily. Let me try again. Yeah, so if you do it by going into this session here, what will happen is that it will cause some conflict. You might even lose access to your VM. So this is no. In the cloud or in Azure, changing of IP address have to be done on the Azure portal, or you can use, let's say, the CLI or the PowerShell to make the changes. So those are some of the changes. I'm just trying to speed up because of time. All right. So let me quickly go back to the slides. Okay, so we discussed the DHCP. And the other thing that we have to talk about is the routing table. Right, so the routing table essentially allow you to direct traffic. So by default, as you can see from here, everything goes to the 10.80.0.1, but there will be instances you don't want the traffic to go to that. You want the traffic to go to, let's say, a network appliance, a firewall to do the filtering before the traffic leaves your network, right? So that's when this comes in. So essentially what you can do with this is that you can define the scope of address that you want to hit this specific rule. So in this instance, so actually, let me quickly jump onto, I think I got one set up already. So let me go to routing table. So setting up of this is extremely simple. Once you click on add, and that's about it. So I'm just going to use the root net as a demonstration here. All right. So the first thing you do is once you define the routing table, you need to add the root and also subnet. All right. So to add a root, you just click on this blade here and then define the root. So I have a root here, root to the internet. And if I've applied this one to a specific subnet. So this essentially allow any traffic that is part of that specific subnet to go straight to this host here. All right, that's about it. Then if I go back and click on subnet, then I've associated this rule to subnet by the name of LAN, which is 10.50.00. So any client within this range will be subject to this rule here. They will be able to send a traffic. First of all, I have to go through the device I've defined. So I've defined this is a firewall. So the traffic will go through this. So let me demo this to you. So I'm just going to quickly go to VM. I think the devices are okay, they are not on at the moment. So I'm just going to turn this on and that on. Start those. Okay, so while this one is coming up, I just want to take the opportunity, because of time, to show you the network security groups as well. So with network security group, it's all about allowing and blocking certain traffic. It's a packet filter by the way. Unlike other firewalls whereby it does other things like, let's say, deep packet filtering, web filtering, IPS, or other advanced security. For the network security group, it's just a packet filtering. I just allow specific service both in and outbound. So if we click on add, right, and we define, let's say, let's just put this one into here, and I'll just say our net NSG. Okay, click on that, create. Okay, it shouldn't take that long. All right, so let's go straight to the resource group. So in the resource, you see here, the moment you deploy NSG, automatically these rules are created for the inbound and outbound. You don't have any control of that, and you cannot even remove or do anything to these ones here. So these are the rules to allow VNet communication, communication to the load balancer, and the last one is deny. And when you go to the outbound, connection to the VNet, and also communication to the internet. These ones you can't do nothing about it. So how do you add a rule to this, your user-defined rule? You can do this by clicking on the blades here. So the outbound and inbound here. So if I click on inbound, I can easily define a rule here. So I can click on the plus icon, and then I'll define a rule here. So you set up your sources, where the traffic is coming from, the source range. So, I mean, normally when you set up connection, it will use a source port as well. So you define it as any, and then you can also define your service, where you want the traffic to go to. So for example, SSH. So you can define that as well. Okay, so now let's quickly jump onto the virtual machines. Just want to see if, okay, so these ones are up now, right? So to connect to these, right, I need to connect to this VM, right? But you realize that this VM doesn't have a public IP address. But in the firewall, I've defined a DNAT rule to allow traffic of any traffic that is on coming in, inbound traffic coming in on this port on RDP to go to the VM, this VM here. So then I can just simply use this IP address to connect to this VM. So if I click on the firewall and click on connect, and then select RDP, this will connect to the VM. So I'm just going to connect to that now. Oh. Okay, here we go. Okay, so connected to the VM. So I'm just going to bring it up PowerShell. So if I bring up PowerShell and then I type in ipconfig, as always, you realize that it's still telling me that the default gateway is still 10.0.50.0.1. But hang on, I have put in a routing table to pass traffic from here, from any traffic on this network to go through my firewall. But the way you can find this out is by if you type in, let's say, if you check the path. So if I type in path pin -n to review the IP addresses and say going to the internet, right? You realize that the connection is going to 0.4. So 0.4, if I go back to my VMs, 0.4 is the firewall here. So so they have two addresses. So if I go to the networking, so if I go networking and then I switch to port A, is going through this one. So all traffic will be subject to filter. Another way you can find this out is by also, monitoring the traffic. So for example, if I bring up another session here, and what I can do is I can actually SSH into my firewall. So the firewall IP address, okay, I think I'm on the wrong. All right, so I think it's this one here. So the firewall IP address is this. So if I copy that, and then I'll open up a new tab, a new PowerShell, and SSH into my firewall. So option 5, option 3. And observe the traffic flow using TCP dump. Any hosts. So I'm just going to, actually, let me just use network. I'm just going to check the IP address. Let me see, NS lookup, bbc.com.co.uk. All right, so they have multiple IP addresses. So I'm just going to use a network. So I'm just going to say any traffic that passed through this firewall and it's on network 151.101.0.0/16. All right, I want to see the traffic. So now let's quickly go to BBC and see. So I've got Chrome on this one here. So let me just, that's Chrome. So the moment I try to browse the internet, this is what happened. You will see the traffic flowing through the firewall. So that shows that the traffic is definitely flowing through our VPN, sorry, our firewall and not the other route. Now, the way you can also check this one on in the cloud, if you go to Azure, is using what we call the network watcher. So with the network watcher, we have the Nest Hub, right? So, but when you're using the net watcher, you first of all have to check to see whether it is available in the region you have deployed the resource. So then you click on this option here, and then you can check. So East US is enabled, so we are good to go. So when I click on Nest Hub, I can then define my resource here. So this one is in Test Lab 1, and just want to check to see whether when I'm going to the internet, that's it. So RoseNet VM1, when this client is going to the internet, where does it go? So once I select that, and then I'll type in, let's say 8.8.8. All right. It will take a bit of time to populate, but it doesn't really take that long. So mostly my first option is to use the VM itself to do the check-in. But there will be certain situations whereby you don't even have access to the VM. You want to check the connectivity, then you use this network watcher. So as you can see here, it tells me that for this client here to go to the internet, obviously 8.8.8 is internet traffic. It will then go through a virtual appliance, and then this is the IP address of the virtual appliance. So Network Watcher is a very, very good tool you have to use when it comes to networking in the cloud. And there are other things you can do. You can check the IP flow verification as well, where you can also use this one to check traffic flow, for example. You can check to see whether the connection to a specific resource. So, for example, I can check for to see whether certain services are open. Then I can just type in the details here. You can also utilize the connection troubleshooter here. So essentially, this will allow you to check to see whether you can connect to certain resource as well. So for example, with this one, I have things defined already. So you can see that VM1 connecting to VM2, and then I can select like it's IPv4, let's say a pin, right? Then you can run a check, and then it will tell you whether VM1 can actually pin VM2. So this will help you to diagnose issues you might have on your network, essentially. So depending on the approach you take, whether using the inside resource here to check the flow, or using the Azure inbuilt resource or network connectivity checker, that will provide you the same ability to find out what you have in this network. So I've run out of time. I wanted to show you DNS as well, but I think we are times against us. So when this one finishes, I'll quickly show you certain aspect of the DNS, and then we can end it for today. Yeah, so that's one of the things here. This can sometimes take a bit of time to populate. So just bear that in mind. So I believe you understand the whole point of this. So I won't waste too much time on this. Let's quickly jump onto the VPN, sorry, the DNS, right? So with DNS, we have the private DNS. So the private DNS allow you to create your own DNS domain name, and then use that one instead of the one provided by Azure. So doing this is super simple. You can easily create the DNS by just clicking on here, and then put into your resource, give that a name. So for example, I'm just going to name this one coffeetest.com. And then that's about it. So you define the resource group, the name, and then you simply create. So just create it here. Yep. So once created, I mean, this won't take that long. I think it will take probably less than a minute to complete.
Hello?
So once created, we can go into the resource, and then we can then link this one to a subnet or a network. So once we link it to a network, then we can then use this one to for DNS essentially. So all the resources on network will have this specific domain. So it's done. So let's go to it, and then let's click on virtual network link, and then click on add. So I'll give that link a name. So I'll just name it RNet link, and I'll select the network. So this will be the RNet. And then this is very important as well. So when you select this option, it will automatically register any new addition VM that you add to this specific network. They will have the record added automatically. So I'll click on OK. So this should take a moment or two. Okay, so while this one is deploying, we will check it from here. Okay, yeah, so I'm just going to close this one down. Let's go back here. Let's refresh this. Yeah, there you go. So it's created. So let's go inside this here. Let's go to the overview. Yep. So in overview, let's refresh this one. So we have VM1 and VM2. So let's refresh this. There you go. So as you can see, the VM1 and VM2 are now showing up here. So if I go to, let's say, this, and then I type in nslookup vm1.coffeetest.com. See there, it resolved to the IP address. And if I do VM2, so if I change this one to VM2, that will resolve to the VM2 address. All right. The other the other DNS that we have is the DNS Zone. So with this one, it's very important that you have to ensure that that domain you define is not used anywhere, which means on the internet as well. So the best thing to do is, first of all, to check on one of those domain issuer sites. So let's go to GoDaddy, godaddy.com. And then we can type in, I'm just going to say Kofi, what should I do? Okay, Kofi Daddy. I know it's not, it's definitely available. All right, so this is available. So we now go back to our DNS zone. Let's create one here. Put in the same resource group. Give the name Kofi Daddy. Kofi Daddy.com.
Hello, Sir Kofi. Just to mention that we've gone way bit over time.
Yeah. So I'm wrapping up. Don't worry. Just wrapping up now. All right. So once you click on that, you can click on review and create, and then create. All right. So this should take a moment or two to complete, and then click on resource. So what we can now do is that we can link this to one of our VMs. So let me quickly do this, and then we can end for today. All right, so let's go to VM and copy, let's say, one of these here. This IP address, public IP. Actually, let me go inside. Copy the public IP. Go to DNS Zone, and then we can add. Sorry, let's go back. Oh, we have one already. So let's refresh. Yeah, there it is right here. So let's click it. So coffeedaddy.com, add a new record set. We can now give this a name as VM. Can't remember, I think it's VM1. And then we can put the address in here. Make sure there's no spacing, and then click on OK. And there you have it. So this will link this VM to this IP, and we can use the name server to resolve these. So we've run out of time. So I'll end today's session here. I hope you guys had enjoyed. I know I had a bit of issues here and there, but I hope you guys learn a thing or two from this session.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining this session.
Thanks very much, Kofi. That was awesome. That was awesome. Lots of ninja commands that you were sharing there. So, just two questions before we end. So we're having issues with Steven's connection also, but
Okay.
we have that time later. So, very quick one. So, first question. So I guess we may not have time for this. So it's from Campbell. So it says, "Can you please explain routing priority a little bit?" So if it's something that we can do within a few seconds, then that would be
Can you
great.
say that again, please?
Says, "Could you please explain routing priority a little bit?"
Yeah, so I had it in the slides, but I couldn't get to it. So the user one, let me just, yeah. So in terms of the routing priority, the user define route take priority, and then followed by the border gateway protocol, and then the system route. So each time you define your own, it will take precedence over everything else.
Awesome. Thanks very much for that. I think that that's very much answers Campbell's question. So the next question, which is the final question for today, is by Satish, which is, what are all other routing devices in Azure other than firewall or IP forwarding enabled VM?
Other routing
Devices. So I don't really understand the question, but it says, what are all other routing devices in Azure? So I guess what it's
okay.
asking is that what other devices can we use for routing if it's not firewall or IP forwarding enabled VM?
I think, I mean, you can probably check the Azure Marketplace and see which other third-party service you have. Azure also have their own firewall. I mean, you can use that one as well. So those would be your options. So it all depends on essentially what you're trying to do, and then there will be certain resources you can use, whether it's inbuilt on Azure, or you can check the Azure Marketplace to see if there's a resource that will meet what you're trying to do.
Awesome. Thanks very much for that. That was extremely useful. Much appreciated as always. Sakofi blessing us with all kinds of networking knowledge today. So later today we have last session for today, which is on DevOps fundamentals, which we're going to be looking at Terraform and Azure DevOps. So thanks very much for joining us, everyone. Really appreciate it, Sakofi. You've been awesome as always. So thanks very much for that.
Thank you guys for joining this session. I hope you will see you guys in the next one.
Thanks. Bye.
Okay,
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.